important story has to do with teenagers, okay, adolescents in San Diego, who are also enacting this act of encroachment, of invasion, these tactics of invasion. Without going too much into detail, there is no time, but the leftover, the empty spaces of the city become the place to cite the informal. This map, which is a very naive map again of erasing the city and just leaving the network of empty spaces in San Diego, whether it is vacant lots, watersheds, brownfields, setbacks, easements, etc. A paper street, probably the most paradigmatic of the elements in the code in Southern California. Paper street is a street that was never built. It's invisible because the topography didn't allow it. It was too expensive. So it remained invisible, and now developers are really capturing those invisible chunks of stupid administration in terms of planning. And I've been again arguing that it is that invisibility that needs to be captured by the informal and so on. Paper freeways, okay, this is the paper freeway that was never built. But many of these leftover spaces in Southern California are surrounded by socioeconomic and political infrastructures that are informal, that need to be brought together. And in this case, the architect becomes one that constructs, designs collaboration, synergies across these agencies that are in neighborhoods, etc. The story out of this one has to do with this piece of a leftover space near the neighborhood where I live in San Diego, next to a freeway. I've been interviewing these very interesting cases. This is a group of teenagers that one day, they told me 5 years ago, they decided one night to go to Home Depot, buy shovels, and together invade this leftover space, which is under the freeway. This is, by the way, the size and the figure that the municipality has registered to identify this leftover space. 2 weeks later, they were stopped by the police. They were barricaded. The teenagers got really pissed, and they decided to organize. They told me that the first thing they did is something that we would never do as architects. They recognized the political power inscribed in that leftover space. They told me that they were lucky because they had not begun to dig under Caltrans, which is a state agency that governs the freeway. It's a very fascist institution. It would have been impossible to negotiate. They were lucky because they dug in an arm of the freeway that belonged to the city. They also told me that they were lucky because they had dug in a kind of Bermuda Triangle. Forget it. A Bermuda Triangle. Don't lose the attention because this is the end. A Bermuda Triangle of jurisdiction. This space could not be managed because it was in between Port Authority, Airport Authority, 2 city district offices, and a corridor called Pacific Coast Highway Review Board. All these red lines are the limits that we never really work with. The institutions behind these limits is really what the teenagers began to work with. They organized as skaters. They went to talk to the faces that were really behind these jurisdictions. They had to negotiate with the city attorney, with the city councils. They had to understand the regulation embedded in the Parks and Recreation. They were advised that they had to become an NGO in order to really negotiate with the city. They contacted other skateboarders in the Bay Area. This transference of knowledge, I think, is super important in this issue, in this context. They had to create their bylaws, their fundraising. They understood how to construct budgets. And again, the actual system of regulation to begin to consolidate fragmented budgets and fragmented policies. So what I'm trying to suggest again, that no intervention into these leftover spaces can begin, and this is for all of us, I think, in terms of our practices, cannot be